Good morning, this is Jessica from CorpU, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Smarter Growth webinar with our partner, Dr. Bob Quinn from the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you should have any issues during the webinar, please type a question in the question box, and I'd be happy to assist you. The webinar is being recorded, and we will share the slides and recordings following the webinar, so be on the lookout for those in your inbox. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you CorpU's founder and CEO, Todd.
All right, thank you, Jessica. Welcome, everybody. We're very excited about today's presentation. So Bob Quinn has an extremely impressive resume and background, has published a lot of books on leadership. He works for the Center for Positive Organizations at the University of Michigan. He's done so many great things, and the cover of Harvard Business Review this current month is featuring an article on purpose-driven organizations by Bob and a colleague. So we're really excited to have Bob Quinn with us today. And before we get on to that, I wanted to just set the stage on CorpU, so everybody knows who we are and what we do. So we are focused on growing high impact leaders at CorpU, and we do that with our organizational learning platform, which we've developed. Over 100,000, probably about 125, 130,000 leaders have gone through programs on CorpU from many great organizations from around the world. And so it's an organizational learning platform that's rooted in the science of how people in organizations learn. And so we know that people learn best when there's an expert leading them and pulling them through. We know they learn best when they're working on a real problem that's integrated with work and they're practicing. So there's deliberate practice in a feedback-rich environment. And we know they learn best when it's sociocultural. So they're collaborating and working with a range of others on real problems with real work. And so what we do at CorpU is make sure that that's happening. And we work with world-class experts from top universities, faculty, authors, experts from around the world on topics that are burning issues that our customers tell us about. And we work with our customers and our expert network to build programs to solve these burning issues. So the typical problems that we solve would be to help organizations transform, to build and strengthen their leadership bench, to change the culture, or to build a specific organizational capability. And those would be things like, we're talking about positive leadership today, but positive leadership in talent management, change management, negotiation, influence, strategy, innovation. And typically for frontline leaders, middle managers, senior leaders, executives, those are the range of programs. And today we're going to focus on positive leadership. And so if you think about what are the benefits of positive leadership, a lot of the research has come out of the Center for Positive Organizations at Michigan's Ross School. And what they have found is that leaders, that they live longer. Positive leaders live longer, they make more money, and they have better relationships with people. And for organizations, they get better employee engagement and customer retention and profitability. So what's not to like? Creating a positive work climate, it's a function of having leaders who show gratitude, compassion, and forgiveness. And so organizations that do that enable the development of a positive work climate that leads to some of these huge benefits that they've proven. So profitability, productivity, employee retention, and so on. So again, there's a pretty deep body of knowledge coming out of the Center for Positive Organizations that talk about those benefits. But we know that it's difficult. This isn't easy. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. So only 14% of companies say that they can sustain the leadership behaviors after formal learning. So we know that's a particular issue. And it's one that we're really excited to have partnered with Bob and the folks at Michigan Ross to build a program with 100 different leadership mini modules to be delivered across 20 weeks with a whole bunch of different themes, of which I'm showing some today for you, just to give you a sense. And the idea is that with 5 to 10 minutes a day, you can create breakthrough change, that you can sustain leadership behaviors, that you can build habits of gratitude and trust. And so we're really excited to talk about that today. But before we get into the details of these 100 new leadership mini modules, I want to turn it over to Bob to talk to us a little bit about practicing positive leadership and what it means. So with that, Bob, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Alan. I'm delighted. I'm looking for is my other slides up?
I'm trying to pass this to you.
Okay.
So I apologize. There we go. Hopefully you see that.
No, it didn't come up.
Oh, I did give mouse and keyboard. Hold on one second. My apologies. When I click change presenter, it shows me 200 people. There we go.
Ah, there it is. Okay. Thanks, Alan. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to explore the notion about this new course. We call it Becoming Who You Really Are, How to Grow Yourself in Your Organization. And it's predicated or built on this notion from Warren Bennis. Becoming a leader synonymous with becoming yourself. It's precisely that simple and also that difficult. I think that's a really key notion. And I'd like to start out by considering a quote from Henry Ford. If I'd asked the customer what he wanted, he would have said a faster horse. There's 100 ways to interpret that sentence. The one I like the best is when I put myself in the role of the customer and Henry asks me what I want. If I can't conceptualize an automobile, the only thing I can ask for is a faster horse. And I believe that dilemma is at the very heart of what organizations and managers and leaders are wrestling with today. We can't create what we cannot imagine. And the thing that I want to imagine is a very, very basic, important thing. And it starts here. Can I imagine my most positive self? What I currently believe about myself does not capture who I really am. That sentence comes from Michael Thompson. He's currently the acting dean of the Marriott School. I was doing a workshop there a couple of months ago, and I asked this question about being the positive self, being best self. And he made the statement, but then he went on and he said, I become who I really am when I feel challenged, when I'm fully focused, fearlessly engaged, whole and authentic, evolving a new perspective and seeing possibility and hope. I found that to be a breathtaking statement. Who I am is not what I was yesterday or even 5 minutes ago. My best self emerges when I'm on that edge of chaos, when I'm moving towards some purpose and I'm growing and I'm contributing. And it's really hard for me to imagine that self. The same holds for positive leadership. I was at a Fortune 25 company last year, and I had a wonderful experience. A very quiet woman spoke up, and she said, we have 1,600 executives in this company. And when I look at them, I see them falling into three groups. Group number one is very, very tiny. It's made up of leaders. I know they're leaders because when I meet them, I want to be like them. What an interesting definition and measure she's applying there. Then she said, there's a really big group in the executive ranks. They're not leaders, they're managers. They intellectually understand leadership. They just don't practice it. And then there's this very tiny group. They're technicians. They're probably never going to understand leadership. When she said this, it took my breath away because for 40 years, I've been going to organizations seeing exactly what she described, but I've never articulated it like that. Since that conversation, I've asked many groups of executives this question: why is the middle group so large? The room every time goes deadly quiet. And I stand and wait. And then someone will say something like this: it's so hard. And someone else will say, the culture. And someone else will say, it's risky. That's really informative. In our organizations, We have cultures, and those cultures keep us from even imagining an organization of leaders. We expect exactly what she described. There may be a tiny handful of people who are leading, the rest are managing, right? That means we need to make some kind of change, and it requires us to see differently. We need to see all of reality. This is a list that is pretty intriguing. We live in hierarchies. We act with self-interest. We minimize personal costs. We fail to learn. We react to constraints. We comply with demands. We fail to see opportunities. We compete with limited resources. People say, well, that's a negative list. And then I often say, well, this is what you and I believe. This list are the assumptions the social scientists operate. When an economist says, here are the first three assumptions of economics. People are rational, self-interested actors. Resources are scarce. Conflict is inevitable. Those are the same assumptions that this list is conveying. In social life, our experience leads us to believe these things. If we do, it causes an interesting problem. If a manager believes these accurate assumptions and acts on them, they will create an organizational structure that reproduces this list. Here's an alternative list. When we look across the literature in positive organization scholarship or positive psychology, you begin to see a very different picture. When you ask the question, what do we look like at our best? We see this. We live in social networks. We sacrifice for the common good. We make spontaneous contributions. We experiment and grow, expand roles, craft jobs, take charge, express voice, envision possibilities, expand the resource pool. When I put the first list up at first, everybody said, well, that's not me. When I talk about that a little bit and then put this one up, they say, oh, this one's Pollyanna. The fact is that the first one is reality. The fact is the second one is reality. There are two realities out there. There's the commonly occurring reality we see all the time. And there's a reality we see when we look at the very best in human experience. The crucial challenge is for us to see all of reality, to recognize all the constraints on the left side as real, and all of the possibilities on the right side as real. If I'm able to combine those two lists, I see all of reality and I become a leader. I'm able to create things that cannot be created otherwise. Let me just explore this notion of positive leadership. The notion of management is heavily tied to problem solving. A manager is restoring order. The manager uses logical analysis and rational persuasion to do it. The manager relies on formal authority and legitimate direction. The manager is usually engaged in decisive action, measurable achievement. We see these as good things, and they are good things. But the manager is an extension and a preserver of the culture. If I'm solving problems, if I'm doing all these things, I'm an extension of the culture. The culture wants to preserve itself. Managers preserve the culture. Let's look at leadership, not from a philosophical point of view, but from empirical research. We know there are 4 factors that hold in every culture of the world that describe transformational influence. Transformational leaders show individualized consideration, they know their people, and they build trust. They use idealized influence. They model virtue. When that woman said, when I meet the leaders in this company, I know they're leaders because I want to be like them. That was a statement of idealized influence. Leaders are inherently attractive because they're good. Inspirational motivation. They create hope for me. They help me connect to a future I can't see. They see potential in me I can't see in myself. They inspire me. And they constantly challenge me. They question me. They make me think, and in so doing, they're empowering me, and I can take initiative. The leader is separate from and a creator of culture. A manager is trying to preserve the culture. A leader is blowing the culture up every day in order to make a better culture. The leader creates conflict with a purpose to make a better culture. When we look at the leadership literature, indeed the whole leadership industry, it revolves around these two words, knowledge and skills. I'm going to write a book about Jack Welch. You read it, you'll be smart, you can be Jack Welch too. It's an unquestionable assumption. Universities provide knowledge, HR departments buy knowledge. That's what leadership development is. That's absolutely, well, it's a key piece of, but it's absolutely off target. Leadership is about living principles and acquiring virtues. It's about moral power. It's about attracting people into uncertainty so they can learn. We can't imagine developing people of moral power. And so the vast number of training programs in the world are training managers. They are not training leaders. The current approach to leadership development is actually quite positive. That is a 15% return on investment. That's not bad, that's great. If you go to a week of leadership training, it's a positive thing. It correlates significantly with outcomes. It's just that 15% leaves 85% on the table. There's so much more that could be accomplished. So what's the problem? I refer to the problem as the Monday problem. You go to a week at the University of Michigan, we give you a great program, you learn a lot. On Monday morning, you return, and there are 500 emails waiting for you. A boss with 2 major projects, 2 angry customers. And by noontime on Monday, you can't even remember there is a place called Ann Arbor, Michigan. The culture eats leadership development for breakfast, just like it eats strategy for breakfast. The culture destroys what the organization pays for. It's an interesting paradox. We're getting 15% return, which is good. We're leaving 85% on the table. What does that imply? This is another radical statement. The organization cannot own your leadership development. If we send you to Michigan for a week in 5 years, and next 5 years send you to Harvard for a week, those are 2 great experiences. Once every 5 years, you're getting pumped up. That's not leadership development. You have to own your own leadership development. No one can own it for you. With that in mind, what we've done is created this new program. It's about 100 days of becoming who you really are. And the way it works is every day on email, you get a message saying, here's today's video. The video is a story. The story is a real world experience that acts like a parable. It causes you to think. It's then followed by 3 simple questions asking you to write a simple sentence without any commas. Question 1, what did you learn from yesterday? Question 2, having watched today's video, what principle of leadership do you see? Not what did Quinn say, but as you listen to Quinn's story, what do you believe is a key principle of leadership that you need to live? Question number 3, 1 simple sentence. What can you do to live that principle today? Now, your answer may be something very simple. I need to shake everyone's hand. Or it may be very demanding. I need to go tell the boss the truth. Those are both actions based on principle. The next day, that first question is, what did you learn yesterday? Now, what's happening is we're asking you to squeeze an experience. It's a story in this case. Develop a principle. A principle is always pulling you towards moral action. When you live that principle by practicing it, even if it's shaking hands, you're having an experience. You're doing something you would not have done any other way. No one's telling you to do it. You're designing it yourself. But then you're squeezing down that experience into a learning process. You're reflecting on it. The way it works is you go through this course with other people, or at least you can. The course is like Lego blocks. You can cut it 100 different ways, but for most of the time, you have the opportunity to go through with other people. They may be peers that you just went through a program with last week. They may be your direct reports. It may be the entire company. It, again, can be cut any way you want. What happens on Friday is there's one more question. You're asked to review the week and those 5 attempts you made, and to write a very short paragraph about your greatest success. So you say, I went in with fear and trembling. I talked to the boss. I told him the truth. Here's what happened. Here's what I learned. That paragraph goes to the rest of your digital community. So it could be your peers, could be your people, could be the whole company. When someone else reads that paragraph, whoa, he went in and saw the boss. Suddenly they're saying, whoa, he or she's taking it seriously. And what that does is that you just created positive peer pressure. And I'm sitting here thinking, maybe I should start following that lead and take it seriously. The moment that starts to happen, the learning becomes a community experience. We're no longer just learning, we're changing behavior, and a transformation takes place. From that digital community, that transformation turns from leadership development to cultural change. If everybody goes through the program is shaking hands on Monday and talking to the boss on Tuesday, and we're sharing that, and we're informing and inspiring one another, pretty soon we have a whole cohort of people doing what they're supposed to do anyway, lead, but normally don't do. And what's happening is we now have a culture change program, not from the top down being designed by somebody. It's from the bottom up. It's an organic process that we're literally changing the culture. So that's the basic notion. It comes from the principles we've learned from positive leadership and positive organization scholarship. It's a program we're very excited about. We hope that it's a program that you can find value in. Again, it can be cut and shaped in many different ways. We just barely started to make this available, and already in the first few weeks, we have all kinds of applications where companies are using it in different ways. So I'm hoping those notions are of some value to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, Bob, thank you so much for giving us that, the teeing up the presentation. And folks, if you have any questions, we're going to switch into some questions with Bob and talk a little bit about the program, talk about positive leadership, talk about the practices. And I want to start off, Bob, first by saying thank you so much for giving us the gift of your time today. You talk a lot about on the fringes of organizational learning, and back in the early to mid 90s, Peter Senge opined that organizational learning was the ultimate competitive advantage, that it increased people's capacity to learn, to think in systems, to achieve team learning. And you've connected that for us really nicely, I think, positive leadership and how it contributes to organizational learning. Can you talk a little, just give us some advice on how do we create or nurture a learning culture? Do you see people that successfully do it versus the ones who give up or don't? Or can you talk about those 15 percenters? How do we create or nurture a learning culture?
That's a crucial question. And first of all, I'd say conventional experience leads to conventional thinking. And in hierarchies, the culture stifles organization learning. Another way to think about that is the second law of thermodynamics. Everything moves towards entropy unless work is done to the contrary. In organizations, that work is called leadership, not management. Leadership. Leadership is what attracts people into settings where truth can speak to power. I often talk about collective intelligence, and I give a very, very homely example, but people light up when they finally get it. And I say, we're in a class in third grade, and I say, how much is 6 times 42, 6 times 7? Johnny raises his hand, he says 50. And I say, Johnny, how'd you get there? And he looks around, and then he starts to tell me. And Sally raises her hand. She says 40. I say, Sally, how'd you get there? She looks around. She begins to tell me, and all of a sudden, Billy says 42. And the question is, who got it right? And the obvious answer is Billy got it right, 42. What if that's the wrong answer? Let's go back to the very first kid. He raises his hand, says 50. I say, not you jerk. I say, how'd you get there? That's a very important and different question. He looks around. Why does he look around? He wants to know if he's safe. And because I've built a positive classroom, he is safe, and we have a passion and a purpose, and that's the love of learning. And so he begins to share how he was thinking. Sally listens to that. Her brain cells start popping. She says 40. I don't say, you jerk. I say, Sally, how'd you get there? She looks around. She wants to know if she's safe. She says, oh, yeah, I am safe. It's a positive classroom. So she shares her vulnerability, what she doesn't know. All of a sudden, the third kid raises her hand and says 42. Now, where did the answer come from? It came from a group of people sharing not only what they knew, but what they didn't know. They shared their vulnerability. Because they trusted each other and we had a purpose, the group was able to learn. They had collective intelligence. In the average corporate meeting, we go in, fold our arms, and sit there and look at the person in the other silo, secretly thinking, I know you have agenda. I know this is a political process. I'm not investing. What a leader does is turns that situation into a situation of high engagement, turns conflict into collaboration, and turns that into a learning situation. That's what this course is about. It's learning the kind of leadership that allow you to do that in every meeting.
So, Bob, I have a question. You talked about vulnerability and trust to achieve collective intelligence, and I'm wondering, how do you get there if you're in a culture that doesn't support that? So you described it with organizations. Are there ways for people to be effective or to make progress when they're in a culture that's toxic or a culture that's not positive?
Absolutely. When I'm in a toxic culture, I have two natural reactions. One is fight and one is flight. I can become bitter or angry, or I can withdraw, get in the fetal position, and become passive aggressive. Those are the two natural reactions. They're both devastating. They destroy you and they reinforce the problem that exists in the company in the first place. So that takes us right back to the notion that becoming a leader is becoming who you really are. And there are four basic questions that you can transform yourself and come up with new strategies every time. The four questions are, what result do I want to create? Not what do I want, which is the question we normally ask, but what result do I want to create? What is my highest purpose for myself, for the organization? And in this setting, what do I want to create? Two, am I internally directed? Have I given away my locus of control? Most of the time, the answer is yes. What would I do if I had 2% more courage? What does it mean to have integrity? Am I internally directed? If I answer those two questions, I immediately pull myself out of my anger, out of my depression. I'm in an alternative state. Third question, am I other focused? Do I understand the deepest needs of the other people here, including the monster boss I have, or that person from the other silo who's always trying to undermine me? And the fourth question is, am I externally open? And am I humble? Am I willing to learn? Now, those are not four philosophical questions. They're questions that are literally designed to transform my thinking in any negative situation. The moment I answer those questions, which is the hard part, I immediately transform. I empower myself. In the normal, conventional, negative organizational situation, I'm constantly disempowered. The people who work for me are disempowered. We feel like victims. The conventional assumptions lead to that mindset, and that's the mindset we know. It is absolutely possible to come out of that mindset and to empower ourselves. And it always begins with empowering ourselves. it's not about someone coming and save us. It's not about us complaining about the organization. It's about changing it's about becoming who we really are.
So, Bob, I'm wondering if that relates to, I've seen you quote or write about Viktor Frankl, and does that relate for you to self-determinant theory and self-determining? Is that related to the topic that you're describing with regards to getting there?
The famous observation by Frankl is he was in a Nazi concentration camp. He said, you can take a normal citizen and a few minutes later put him in a context where he becomes a monster. And that may be the dominant pattern, people all fending for themselves in that concentration camp. He said, but even in the concentration camp, there were a handful of people who did not fit the pattern. They were internally directed. They went around sharing their last piece of bread. They went around nurturing, serving. And he said, if it happens there, it can happen anywhere. Well, that's what those 4 questions are about. When we use the positive lens in science and we look at people as the best, we look at teams at the best, we look at organizations at their best, what we see are purpose-driven, internally directed, empathetic, humble people. Humble doesn't mean weak, it means strong in this case. And when that's the person next to you or the person above you or the person below you, they inspire you. They're a virtuous person. They have idealized influence. They're leaders. It doesn't matter if they have position, they're leaders. And so the answer is yeah, it has much to do with that quote.
And so if we just take that a step further, I'm wondering if you could talk about, you've written about and talked about higher purpose and for an organization, but then for a person to have professional purpose and personal purpose that aligns with the organizational purpose. And what you've said is that when you get that, the tighter that alignment, the more people will try new things and move into deeper learning, and they'll take risks and they'll make surprising contributions. I wonder if you could talk about ways in which people might align their professional purpose to the organizational purpose, or even further, just defining their purpose. How should one think about going to do that and take notes and write it down? And how do you get there?
Those are great questions. Let me take them in the logical order. I think the first one is personally, how do I find in my own? And second, how do I align people in an organization? In the cover story for the Harvard Business Review this month, that's what that article is really about. That second question. There was a article 4 or 5 years ago called "Moments of Greatness" that answered the first question. So simple answer to the first question. The question is, what is my life mission? What is my life purpose? The typical answer is, I want to be number one. Well, that's not a life mission. Well, I want to make a lot of money. That's not a life mission either. A life mission or life purpose is my contribution. What is it that's uniquely me that I have to give to the world that's going to make a difference? In my own personal case, I spent years boiling it down to 3 words: inspire, positive, change. That's who I am. That's my mission in life. I can talk for 2 hours about any one of those 3 words. When you have that purpose, you can go to a boring meeting, recall your purpose, your behavior will immediately change. If I'm in that boring meeting, I don't throw hand grenades, but I start asking questions. I start pushing in new directions. I take initiative to make the meeting better for everyone, including the leader of the meeting. Purpose functions that way all the time. Now, how do you find it? Here's the simplest way to do it. Write down a sentence, give yourself 60 seconds, no more, no less, write it down. You'll have it wrong. That's fine. Tomorrow morning, 60 seconds. Circle the words from today that are in your sentence that you think have some meaning. Using the circled words, write a new sentence. Do it again the next day, the next day, the next day. On the 11th or the 21st or the 31st or the 42nd day, you're going to suddenly run up to whoever's next to you and say, read this. And the reason you're going to be so excited is you finally cracked it. Give yourself time. Write that sentence. Let it percolate. Let it grow. In the end, it just has to reflect who it is you really are and what you have to give to the world. Once you have that, you can organize your life to it. It becomes the arbitrator of all your decisions. Your to-do list will be cut in half immediately. It changes everything. Now, let's go to the second step. Second question is, how do you line that in an organization? In the article, we give a lot of examples. KPMG, a company of accountants, a company that was pretty sure they didn't believe in any of this stuff and ended up accomplishing amazing things. And in the latter steps of their process, they had finally found the company purpose. They had done work with middle management. And they said, but we now have to align all the people, something that most companies always ignore because they can't imagine how to do it. KPMG created a digital poster. Your job was to, as an employee, was to put your picture in the middle of the poster. And underneath it, you write your purpose and that purpose at work and how it relates to the larger purpose at the top of the poster that's KPMG. One of the women, for example, wrote, I combat terrorism. When I do an audit, I'm making sure money's not laundered so that it doesn't go to the wrong place. So that would be a typical poster. When they first started, they said, if we get 10,000 posters by Thanksgiving, we'll give the whole workforce 2 extra days off at Christmas. This was in June. By July 4th, they had the 10,000. By Thanksgiving, they had more posters than there were employees in the company. Some people made 2, many teams made them. The people were hungry to do this. They were worried that anybody would do it. The impact was enormous. It touched the bottom line of that company. It changed their standing on best places to work. The impacts were endless. Most companies don't do that. Most companies can't imagine doing that. And that means that people listening today have a great opportunity. If you're willing to learn to do personal and organizational purpose work right now, the rest of your career, you will be far more valuable than any of your peers because you'll be leading and your peers don't know how to lead. And I think that's a very important thing to work on.
So, Bob, can we do that at something less than the entire enterprise level? So maybe many people that are on with us today run a business unit, or they're in charge of a function, or they're a chief learning officer, a chief supply chain officer. Can you do this purpose work at that level?
The answer is absolutely yes. And I can give endless examples. I could start at the top of the people under the CEO who do it in their division, people who go all the way down to a small team. The first knee-jerk reaction is, I can't do it. I only have a small team, or it's the CEO's job. Well, it's the CEO's job to do it at the top, and the CEO may or may not do it. And if they do it, it may be hypocrisy. But your job is to lead your people. And so the question is, how do you do that? What is the highest purpose? What are the deepest values of the unit? How are they conveyed? How do I create a culture? 2 of the greatest sentences I ever heard from a CEO named Jerry Anderson, who was a tough, technically oriented guy. And then when he got to the top, he went through a crisis and it turned him into a leader. And he said, I know how they think down there. They think like I used to think. If they do a root cause analysis and find out the problem is culture, they go to the sink and wash their hands. In other words, the average middle manager doesn't believe culture is their job. He said, I knew I had to change it, but how do you change that? He spent months thinking about that. And he came up with 2 sentences that I think are golden. Sentence number 1, every manager gets exactly the culture they deserve. That is a golden sentence. Sounds useless at first. You think about that sentence. It says, I, the manager, own the culture. I'm creating the culture. The second sentence, if you want a better culture, what are you going to do to deserve it? That's a profound question. It puts the responsibility right where it should be. You can tie that immediately back to the topic this morning. Becoming a leader means becoming who you really are. It's that simple and that hard. It's about being a leader. Our mentality, our conventional assumptions carried by the organization culture teach us that we are managers, we're not leaders. And as long as we accept and live those normal assumptions, then we don't grow much, and the organization doesn't grow much, and the people around us don't grow much.
So, Bob, I'm wondering if we can go one level deeper. You pointed to some research that there's little empirical progress on the role of purpose, despite a fivefold increase in the public conversation about purpose. And there were some, what I found to be some. You pointed to a study in which there were some shocking conclusions that it was solely middle managers that drive the relationship between purpose clarity, and financial performance. And it was less so associated, if not no association, for senior executives and sales and hourly staff. So if I read that correctly, it puts an enormous amount of power on middle managers, and it makes me think that they're the drivers of culture change, and they're the ones that should be the focus of, let's say, a CEO or an executive team. And I'm number one is, do you find that research as profound as I do? And number two, do you see people doing something about that? Do you see senior executives that are awakening to that power of recognizing the middle manager as the real change leader?
Yeah, a couple of very minor alterations on that. What they found was really a two-factor process. One was the people at the top were really, really clear about the purpose. And I think what that really means is they were not only clear, they were authentic. The purpose was real. And that's a big deal because in most companies, the purpose are PR words and they don't govern decisions. And people just become cynical. But there's clarity and commitment at the top. And then the second piece is middle management when it gets to that level. So that the people in the middle understand and accept the purpose, then you get these tremendous outcomes. Now, the people between the middle and the top are probably also accepting it. But why is it that works? Well, if the people at the middle of the system really believe in the purpose and commit to it, you now have leaders at the center of the system, and they're touching the people below them. What that means is you're moving the whole organization. And that's really what needs to be accomplished. But the average CEO cannot envision that. The average CEO doesn't want to do purpose work. One of the interviews we did for that HBR piece was at Edward Jones, and the CEO told us the story of a meeting 25 years ago when he was a young executive. They're having a retreat. The facilitator was Peter Drucker. Drucker asked them what their purpose was. They talked about it for a few minutes, and you could see the CEO getting antsy. Now, when that happens in a room, everybody reads that, and they immediately start pushing to move on. They all did. The one person who refused was Drucker. He made them spend the entire day on organizational purpose, something they did not want to do. Today, the CEO attributes the incredible accomplishments at Edwin Jones to that one meeting and that work on purpose. What's important about that story is not what seems obvious, that purpose is valuable. What's important about that story is the CEO did not want to waste his time doing purpose work. The vast majority of the managers in the world do not want to waste their time doing purpose work. It's not problem solving, right? I'm addicted to problem solving, which is management. And that's the way organizations run. They can't imagine having an authentic purpose. But when you study these companies that do have it, they have all of those things. Now, your last part of your question was, is there a trend? We're seeing an enormous migration towards purpose. Anjan and I have been writing a book for 2 years that article is based on. We're still finishing it up. In that time, I cannot tell you how many people have contacted me to tell me about the book they're writing on purpose, how many articles are being written about purpose. The interest in purpose is intense, but much of it's going to go to waste because the audience can't hear the message. And the key is opening those hearts and minds in ways that they can see how they can do purpose work, how they can help other people do purpose work, because everything in their experience in the hierarchy says it's not possible, I'm not potent, I'm unable.
And I wonder if that's related, Bob, just sparking a thought that the Gallup organization has been tracking employee engagement for a long time, and we sit at 30-year lows, even though we all know they've written books. You need meaningful work, a boss you like, a friend at work, and there are all these sort of research and intervention things, but we haven't made progress in employee engagement as well. And I'm curious, I know you've done a lot of work and a lot of thinking on positive leadership and its effects on employee engagement. Could you just talk about that?
Yeah. What I'd like to talk about is some data that's still confidential. But we have some very dramatic data that shows when you take people through these kinds of notions, not by teaching them, but by exposing them and then having them do things so that they internalize the notions, so they get this notion of living principles, their engagement scores are significantly higher, and so are the engagement scores of their direct reports. It'll take quite a long time for that data to come out, but it's very dramatic. And there's lots of other data that's pointing in that same direction. But a better way to think about it and understand it without having to do any statistics is simply ask this question. What does the best team or unit or division in my organization look like? I'll give you an analog experience. We did work with the University of Michigan Hospital. They wanted us to help directors of nursing because they said they're disempowered. When we went to visit with them, they were incredibly disempowered. Instead of giving them lectures on empowerment, we said to the administration, are all 62 units the same? They said, no. We said, tell us about your best unit. They did. And we said, how do you know? And they said, well, lower cost, faster recovery rates. They went through all kinds of measures and tuning turnover. They said, some of these units get to 70% turnover. This unit has 0 turnover and 200 people waiting to work in that unit. That immediately tells you something. We went to visit that unit. They were amazing. They had all the units had been given money to hire a host or hostess. 61 of them went out and hired nurses. These people went out and hired a drama major, sent her to nursing school, clown school. And when you come in with your incredibly sick kid, there's this clown, deeply skilled clown, who greets you, and within minutes, you know you're part of a family that cares about you. Everything about that unit was exciting. When people described the woman that led the unit, they got tears in their eyes. Now, here's one unit out of 62 that's truly excellent. What did we do with that data? We went back, we laid that in front of them, and they said, oh, that doesn't count. We said, what do you mean it doesn't count? Same hospital, same doctors, same rules. Why does excellence exist in that unit? And all of a sudden, they had to think. We just put data in front of them that distorted their assumptions about the world. And all of a sudden, we were having real conversations about empowerment. All you need to do is to look around. Ask yourself, who is the most powerful, positive influence in my life? And you may say your mother, your third grade coach, your teacher. And then ask yourself this, what did that person do that was different than others? And I can already tell you the answer. They had idealized influence, individualized consideration. They inspired me because they saw potential in me I didn't see in myself, and they constantly challenged me and empowered me. The answer is a universal answer. It's elusive because we can't see it because it's always in the 1%. But in every curve, we have millions of curves. That's a lot of 1%ers. The whole world is full of transformational leaders. They're not on Time Magazine. They're your third grade coach. They're your mother. Same thing with units and teams. If there's 100 teams in the company, one of those teams is excellent. How can that possibly be? Well, it's real. We ought to go examine that.
You make it sound so powerful and inspiring and easy that we can go after it. So we have a question. Do you believe everyone can be an effective leader, or are some people just not wired for the role?
I believe that every human brain is wired the same. That is fight or flight. When there's distortion in front of us, it's fight or flight. I believe that some of us, from the time we were able to talk, were in settings that told us we had no voice, that we had no influence. I believe some of us get beaten down. One of the jobs of a leader is to take that person who knows they can't lead and open their eyes. The principles we're talking about is what does that. People transform through one of two processes. One is crisis. In crisis, I'm forced to ask the question, who am I? That is, what's my identity? What's my destiny? When you go into crisis, you often get depressed. If you go to a psychologist, they have some therapy. It's all about value clarification. The moment you clarify your identity and your destiny, you get up off the couch, you walk out, and you're empowered again. That's what leadership's about. I can tell you stories about the most trapped, non-influential human beings I've ever encountered that have come through our courses, who all of a sudden saw possibility and then very tentatively, with great fear, started taking steps forward, and we nurtured them. And today they're a very different person than they were before. Everybody has constraints. Everybody has strengths. Everybody is an influence. The shyest, most introverted, most terrified person has an influence. That influence can change. That's what leadership's about.
You know, you jogged a thought for me, Bob. Because of all of the programs we do at CorpU and your upcoming program, the 100-day program, they're built around a sociocultural theory of how people and organizations learn. And by that, we mean we connect people together in purpose-built groups to work on a problem, to share ideas, to build a safe environment, to generate ideas and teach and learn from each other and from the experts inside and outside that network. And what has been fascinating about our work, the work that we've been doing at CorpU, that I've been deeply involved in, is the power of creating these sociocultural learning environments for those that identify on the introversion side of the spectrum. And what we've seen in organizations is that we'll go to large organizations and run programs for hundreds of people, could be thousands of people, could just be 50 people in a program. And when we get back the deep analytics that we run at the end of every program, shows us the extent to which people engaged in the material and engaged in dialogue, attempted to achieve clarity and shared vision together about the content or the teaching. And what's fascinating is, and I've watched this over and over and over for a number of years now, is when people are looking at the analytics, essentially the outcomes reports, they always go, wow, at the number of people that they see in their organization that are quiet in meetings. And when they have them, they don't talk, they don't step up. But then you put them on CorpU, where they're in an environment where they're asynchronously collaborating with people, digitally, you might say, that these people come out of their shell. And I found that to be a fascinating thing. And I think that's something that we have a lot of potential for. And I think Susan Cain has written a book called Quiet, that perhaps through what we're doing with you, we may be able to unlock the forgotten half, the other half of people, the people that don't feel comfortable and safe in stepping up in meetings and sharing their opinions. So you sparked that thought for me when you described that. I'm hoping that we can achieve that together with the 100-day program.
That's exactly the same theory I hold. Probably the most exciting study I ever did was captured in a book called The Best Teacher in You. We went and looked at the top 1% of the public school teachers in the state of Ohio. These are the people who walk on water. You send your kid to school in September to the 4th grade. In June, they come home doing 7th grade work. Not just your kid, but every kid in the class. These are miracle workers. Now, before we ever went to interview the first one, I knew they weren't school teachers. What were they? They were transformational leaders. Interviewing them was just a spectacular experience. What was their theory? Exactly your theory. My job is not, I don't have a job, I have a calling. My purpose is not to teach math, history, or English. My purpose is to create the love of learning, because if I can get my kids to love learning, they'll be empowered forever. How do I do that? I build a positive classroom. They don't have that word, but that's what they do. In that classroom, the purpose is clear. In that classroom, the trust for me, the teacher, is off the scale. And it has to be, because when I ask them to do things that they don't believe they can do, I have to have their trust. In other words, they're pulling those people ahead all the time, supporting their kids while they challenge their kids. And the kids are having enormous growth, and they're experiencing a respectful environment where everyone's an equal, including the teacher, by the way. And in that environment, learning explodes. And the interesting thing is, we wrote the book, and shortly after we wrote the book, we were made aware of another book by Ken Bain about the best college professors, where he had done the exact same study. What he says in his book and how they create those classrooms are exactly the same thing we found with the others. And those teachers were incredibly lonely. When we brought them together, they were shocked to find out other people believed what they believed, because they got there on their own. They didn't read a book. They got there through crisis. They got there through deep reflection. They were introverts. They were extroverts. They were tall and short, heavy and thin. They came from everywhere. Same thing is true for leadership. And the notion of having that learning community is so crucial, because remember, I said 2 key words that never are taken into account. Positive, 3 words, positive peer pressure. In those classrooms, those teachers create positive peer pressure. If your people engage in this 100-day program, you slice and dice it, you set it up so that the peer experience is real, and you've seeded as much as possible so that people are being authentic with one another. You create a learning community. When you do, you make organizational change, and the learning goes off the chart. That doesn't have, contrast that with the meetings you go to with where everybody has their arm folded. How much learning is occurring in that arm folded meeting? The difference is night and day.
Well, Bob, I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. We're out of time, but we're really excited that we have upcoming programs. And so anybody that would like to get more experience positive leadership with Bob Quinn, Becoming Who You Really Are, we're running July 30th, a 1-week program, and driving your team to high performance. We're doing another week, so some trials for people to get experience what these open programs look like. Bob, thanks again for everything. Fantastic hour today, and you've enlightened us with so much about positive leadership. That you're just a wonderful role model example of positive leadership in action. Thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you, Alan.
Okay, thanks everybody. That's a wrap.